Welcome to Meet the Author, where you can join in on insightful conversations with best-selling and award-winning indie published authors. Your hosts today are Rob and Joan, who themselves are indie published authors, book publicists, and paranormal investigators with Tampa Bay Spirits, based in Tampa Bay, Florida. Thanks for dropping by. And now, on with the show.
Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Joan. Welcome to the show. Whether you're watching this as a live pre-recorded show, and I'll try to remind you of that. This is a pre-record. We're so happy that you decided to join us. Or if you're listening to the podcast or rewatching the vodcast at a later date, we're really happy that you are here with us.
Absolutely. And if you are watching this live pre-recorded episode, it is just about Christmas, and we want to wish everyone a very merry and safe Christmas this year. So in light of that, things coming up, Voice of Indie podcast, make sure you stay tuned right after this broadcast. Don't know who the guests are going to be because we're pre-recording, so we don't know who their guests are, but that's Beam Weeks and Stephen Gary G's, and they're on every Wednesday right after our show. Episode Rewind coming up this Saturday night, December 24th. It's episode 57 with Hank Kentz. Did I say that right? Okay. I always messed up his name before, so hopefully I got it right. And that's same place where you're watching right now. It's at 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, December 24th. And live next Wednesday, will be author Chris Chrisman, one of our regulars in the audience. He's going to be on board. He's the author of the Mixed Magic Saga. I think there's two. He's got two books written at this point. It's a metaphysical science fiction series. So we're looking forward to having Chris.
Our metaphysical friends will be happy to hear that.
There you go. So without much ado, shall we introduce Mr. David TINDELL? Hi, David. Welcome.
Welcome, and hello from Northwest Wisconsin.
There you go. I bet you're really super cold there now.
Well, that depends on your definition of super cold. It's about 28, maybe close to 30 degrees here today.
Okay, and this is still November.
We're doing the pre-record.
Got a little ways to go, and I know Duluth is, you're not too far from Duluth, and that's one of the coldest places in the country. So,
yeah, we're about 90 miles south of Duluth Superior. We're about an hour north of Eau Claire. For a little perspective, it's about a 2-hour drive from here to the Twin Cities, where my wife and I fly out of. In fact, we're heading out to Arizona a week from this on the 18th. We're going to be competing in a Spartan race in Phoenix on the 20th.
Really?
Nice.
So that's our next trip.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, we read in your bio that you are quite a traveler there. You guys like to travel a lot.
I do, and I was smart enough to marry a gal who owns a travel agency. That certainly helps.
Well, there you go. That would be the ticket, wouldn't it, for you both?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Dave. You already have told us a little bit, but tell us how you got started writing.
Well, I'd like to say that I was born a writer, but nobody is ever born a writer or born pretty much anything. You kind of learn as you go. I had the benefit growing up in southwest Wisconsin in a small town on the Mississippi River. I had some excellent teachers, Mrs. Millman and then Mrs. Leonard, who were English teachers, and they introduced me to great writers. I recall that Mrs. Millman, the first book she put in my hands, you might say, was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, collection of short stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. And that really got me kind of going on there. And then Mrs. Leonard helped me kind of refine the writing part of it all. And then I had a really good geography teacher in high school, Mr. Peak, who really started turning me on to other cultures. And growing up in a small town in Wisconsin in the 70s, you know, other countries were like going to the moon. You'd only went overseas if you were in the service or if you were rich. There's, of course, a wide world out there, and my wife and I have been fortunate enough to visit a good part of it. We were in France for a week in October, sailing on the Seine, and I'm not sure what we have planned. Oh, we're taking our kids and our family to Alaska on a cruise next year, so we've been fortunate to be able to travel widely, and this has kind of inspired me to do stories where my characters are kind of all over the place.
Excellent.
Excellent.
And so other people that maybe aren't married to a travel agent can live it out through your books, which I always did growing up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she kind of inspired me to write. I had done some writing in high school and in college. I won some short story awards, and then the real life kind of intervened, and you know how that goes. Mm-hmm. And I actually got a degree in radio, TV broadcasting in college and started working in radio. And then about 15 years ago, my wife was reading a book one night in bed, and she kind of tossed it aside, and she had read some of my stuff that I had not published. And she said, you can write better than this junk. And I said, what was it about? Oh, well, I forget. It was, a fiction, a novel, maybe had vampires in it or something like that. And so I thought, well, okay. So I sat down, well, what am I going to write about? And The White Vixen, my first novel, was the result of that. And that kind of started things going.
That was The White Vixen. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. That was your first one. You want to tell us a little bit about that one? Just a little, no spoilers.
Sure. The White Vixen takes place in the early 1980s. And, you have to pick a protagonist. Who is your protagonist going to be? I decided to go with a woman. That would present me with a challenge as to how to write about a woman. But fortunately, I married one. So I could run things by her and say, would she act this way? Would she say this in relation to a man, for example? And I'd either get, yeah, that would be okay, or no way. I also was in a writer's group with 5 or 6 other people who were all women, and they would guide me along like that. And so then I had to pick a conflict. I wanted to write in the thriller genre because that's the one I was most familiar with in terms of reading. And I also wanted to have her be a martial artist because I am. And I wanted her to travel a lot, which is what I do too. And so the result was that I have Joanne Geary, who is a Korean American. She is an expert martial artist and a linguist, and she's in U.S. Air Force Special Operations. And in early 1982, she is detached to British intelligence to go to Argentina on the eve of the Falkland Islands War to find out who's really behind it, because they have indications that there's something going on that is more than just the Argentines deciding to take this little group of islands that nobody really cares about. And so she is sent down there undercover to find out who's really behind it. The cover kind of might give it away just a hair. And she has to prevent that from really blowing up into something a lot more serious.
So for the people that are just listening to the podcast, can you describe the cover for us?
Yeah, the cover, I had to, I had no idea how to do a book cover. And you've seen all kinds of book covers, of course, and some of them are really good and some of them are really not good. And I contracted, in this case, with a South African firm to do the book cover. And what they did was ask me for a synopsis of the book, which I provided. And then they send me 4 or 5 different versions. And then you take a look and you mix and match the elements and come up with something like that. I now use a similar firm that's based in Croatia, cover artist, and it's kind of an interesting way to do business because, of course, Europe is several hours ahead of Wisconsin. And so when they finish their day, I'm almost ready to start mine. And so it kind of works out really well.
So to tell people at home, you see a picture of his protagonist on the front, helicopter, a Nazi flag flying. If any of you are familiar with the Nazis in Argentina, you understand that. And some type of
Looks like a destroyer, maybe?
destroyer, a battleship flying under.
It's a, and you'll see it's flying the English naval jack.
Yeah.
And so the elements of the story tell you that although Nazis could very well be involved, this is not a World War II novel because they didn't have helicopters back then.
No, you said
Right.
it was in the 80s. So
That's
I
right,
was
yes.
saying you understand the connection with Nazis in Argentina post World War II.
Right.
Yes,
So the second book in that series would be The Red Wolf.
yes,
Got the same protagonist.
it is. And in
All the
fact,
way through.
it's a different model. The model that the company used in the first book was a lady I was not familiar with, but for the second book and the third one in the series also, the model is one of my Taekwondo students.
Oh, wonderful.
Her
That's
name
very
is
nice.
Jenna. Yes. And I asked her if she might be interested in modeling, and she said yes. And should I bring my gun? And I said, well, yeah, okay, but don't load it. And so I remember we shot the cover, the photos for the cover, just her version, her portion of it. And she had a really nice, tight black leather outfit on, and she had her handgun, and she had her two teenage daughters with her that day, I remember. And after we shot the photos and we were looking at them, and one of the daughters said, "Mom, you're a real badass." Jenna thought that was pretty nice. She's a nurse, actually. And in this one, it's set a few years after the events of the first novel, and this one is in the Iron Curtain. Joe is by now a member of a special operations group called Palace Group, and their first mission is to go behind the Iron Curtain into Eastern Europe, in Hungary in this case, and to stop a rogue Soviet assassin who is going to assassinate Mikhail Gorbachev, an event that could very well touch off or turn the Cold War hot overnight. What you see in the background there is the Danube and the city of Budapest, which Sue and I visited as the start of a Danube cruise. And it's a beautiful city. And it was the source of, or the place where the Russians actually invaded back in 1956 to put down a rebellion. And the Hungarians have not forgotten about that. And so I thought that would really be a good place to set the novel.
All right. And then the third one in that series is the Bronze Leopard. And we have the same model holding.
Yes, Jenna. Mm-hmm.
I hope she
That's
wasn't
actually
bringing that rifle to the.
That's not the one she brought to the.
No, but that is hers.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And
Just badass.
actually,
She's serious.
the beret and the shawl she is wearing, those are my wife's. And
Excellent.
in the Bronze Leopard, it takes place a couple of years after the events of the Red Wolf. And Joe and her unit have finished a mission in East Africa, in Tanzania. And she decides that before she goes home, she and her second in command, who was another woman, are going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, which at over 19,000 feet is the largest mountain in Africa. And lots of people climb Kilimanjaro all the time. You don't need special mountaineering experience. You don't need oxygen. It's not easy, but a lot of people do it in all age ranges, from kids 8 years old, I've heard, up to senior citizens and the disabled folks and whatnot. In fact, I intend to do it hopefully next year. So she and her comrade are going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, but in the meantime, there are people there in East Africa who have decided that she's not coming down alive. And you can see that the crest that's behind the title is the East German military crest. And so that gives you a hint of what's going on with that.
All right. Okay, then we come to your next series. Let's see.
Quest, I think, is the top.
All right, let me find it. Here we go. Quest for Honor.
Yes, Quest for Honor is a novel that is not connected to the Vixen series at all. And this is set in modern times, well, actually about 10 years ago now. I had the idea when I was watching a news broadcast one time around 2010 or so that showed a Western journalist, a European, who was captured by the terrorists over in the Middle East, and they were going to execute him on the internet. And so I thought, well, that's a pretty tough spot, but okay, smart guy, what would you do in that situation? I've been training in martial arts for over 20 years, and you try to train for most reasonably possible scenarios. That wouldn't necessarily be one that you actually trained for, but there hopefully would be something you could do there. So what would you do? So I decided to write about that. And Quest for Honor is about two brothers from southern Wisconsin. They're both in their 40s. The older one is a civilian. His name is Jim Hayes. And Jim has lost his wife to an act of violence a few years earlier. And he had just started martial arts training at that time, and he was not able to prevent her murder. And so since then, he's really dove into the training to try to make himself ready in the event something else happens and somebody else needs his help. And his younger brother, Mark, is about ready to retire from the Army after a long career as an officer. And in the meantime, there's a third person involved. Somebody comes out of Jim's past. He is a terrorist chieftain who is based in Somalia. He's from Uganda. And years earlier, when he was a college student, he attended the same college in Wisconsin as Jim Hayes did. And now this guy is tired of endless jihad, and he's going to defect to the Americans and turn himself over to the CIA, but he doesn't trust any Americans except that one guy he met in college, and that's Jim Hayes. And he says to his CIA guy, if you bring Jim Hayes over here to Mogadishu, I will surrender myself. And so Jim Hayes now has a choice to make. He's going to either become involved or say, no, I don't want anything to do with this. But of course, he chooses to serve his country in that respect. He's never been in the military himself. He had a severe knee injury in high school, or college, I should say, which prevented him from joining the service. So he's always been a little jealous of his brother. Now, his brother, at the same time this is all happening, is stationed at a base in Afghanistan, so he's going to become involved in it too, as they try to work on intelligence that is gained by Jim in his quest.
So would you like to read us an excerpt from Quest for Honor?
Sure.
Great.
This takes place now in Somalia. Jim has made it over there, and the turnover, if you will, the surrender of the terrorist leader has not gone according to plan. I mean, what kind of a book would it be if everything went smoothly, right? And so Jim has now been captured, and along with, he's now at a camp that is run by actually some Iranians who have been there as advisors to the Al-Qaeda people. And this is what's going to happen. So chapter 34, actually. They came for him sometime mid-morning, the same two men who had brought him breakfast a few hours ago, some sort of broth with a few vegetables, hard, dark bread, and a bottle of water with an Arabic label. They were Middle Eastern in appearance, early 20s, dressed in nondescript shirts, fatigue pants, with one guy incongruously wearing a Boston Red Sox cap. Jim got to his feet, stood with his hands raised. The Red Sox fan came in first, leveling his AK-47 at Jim. Another armed man appeared behind the first in the doorway. The first guy said something to Jim, motioning with the gun to the door. Jim took some cautious steps toward the doorway, keeping his hands visible. He forced himself to smile, and the second guy's eyes narrowed. There was a hallway with two more doors on the right, the same side as Jim's cell, and three on the left. At the end was a larger door. When they opened it, the sun blazed in. He shaded his eyes with his left hand, making sure to keep the right held shoulder high, palm facing outward. They were facing what appeared to be a central square with low one-story buildings around the perimeter. Behind them was a wall about 10 feet high, looking like it had been built with the same material as the buildings, probably some kind of bricks made out of mud. There were men walking here and there, some standing and watching them. Every one of them had an AK. Some held casually, others loosely from the shoulder by a strap. They didn't look nearly as tough as the troops Jim had seen at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, but Jim knew it would be dangerous to make that assumption. Everyone in motion stopped when they got sight of the tall American, and they stared. Some looked curious, most hostile. There were a few dark-skinned Africans, but most were Middle Eastern, all with beards. Some looked to still be in their teens, while a few showed some gray. How to deal with those stares? Show no fear, Jim told himself. But that wasn't easy, because he was starting to feel the first tendrils of something dark and stark and cold reaching into him. It was worse than what he'd felt the night before in Mogadishu while being hustled at gunpoint through rubble-strewn buildings with artillery shells crashing nearby, then shoved roughly into the back of a truck, blindfolded and tied to his seat. He was led to a long building and pushed inside. It appeared to be some sort of conference room, maybe a chow hall, as it had some rickety-looking metal tables and chairs, now moved to the sides along the walls. At one end hung a black flag featuring a yellow circle in the middle and Arabic writing above it. Jim recognized it from news broadcasts, the banner of Al-Qaeda. The writing was the Shahada, referring to Allah as the only God and Muhammad as his prophet. Beneath it were 3 men sitting in chairs. A dozen feet away were 3 empty chairs facing them. Jim was shoved roughly down into the chair at the right end. There were open windows on the long sides of the building, and between the sunlight coming in and the naked bulbs hanging from the ceiling, Jim got a good look at the 3 men. The one in the middle was clearly in charge, Middle Eastern with a thin black mustache. He wore olive drab military fatigues, bare of any insignia, his pants bloused above combat boots. The man to his left was dressed similarly, but the one on the other end looked like most of the men Jim had seen outside, who'd been wearing any number of clothing combinations, mostly fatigue pants, but shirts that ranged from long-sleeved tees to captain-style tops that reached down to the knees. 2 armed fighters took up the station at either end of the seated men, and Jim sensed the presence of more behind him. He was surprised his wrists were not bound, but that didn't make him feel much better. There was a slight commotion behind him, and he saw the seated man look past him. The middle one smiled and gestured to the 2 empty chairs. Jim turned his head just enough to get a glance backward. It was Joe. That's the terrorist that is Jim's old friend.
Right.
He had been roughed up. 2 men in fatigues, similar to the 2 in front, dumped him hard into the middle seat. "One more," the man in the middle said in English, and a few seconds later, Jim heard murmurs coming from behind. Denise Allenson, the CIA agent accompanying them, was shoved down into the empty chair. Her hair was askew. There was a bruise on her right jawline, and she was clutching the front of her shirt, holding it together with her left hand. Jim could see a few limp threads hanging from the upper buttonholes. The middle man in the middle smiled and said, "Well, what am I going to do with you now?" Jim couldn't place the accent, could have been from anywhere in the region. He wasn't experienced enough to know a Palestinian from an Egyptian or anyone else. Jim swallowed, fighting the fear, but he had to say something, had to show these bastards that they hadn't beaten him. With an effort, he said, "Who are you?" "Ah, you are..." The man pulled Jim's passport out of a thigh pocket of his pants. "James Hayes, American. Why are you in Somalia, Mr. Hayes?" "I had some vacation time coming and decided to see the sights." "Not a wise choice," the man said. "I am Major Haidar. The gentleman to my left is Captain Khorsandi, and to my right, Amir, who is now the commanding officer of this camp." "If he's the commander, how come you're doing the talking?" Something told Jim he shouldn't antagonize the man, but he figured they were way past that now. "Amir's English is not good, unfortunately. He has asked me to conduct these proceedings." Denise spoke in a strong and defiant voice that Jim was pleased to hear. "You have no right to keep us here. We are citizens of the United States, and you have no legal authority to detain us. I insist that you allow us to contact our embassy in Djibouti." "Miss Allenson, is it, yes?" Haidar asked, still smiling. "You and Mr. Hayes are Americans, yes, but you are also spies, and so will be tried on charges of espionage against the people of the Islamic Republic of Somalia. As for Mr. Shalita here, he will be tried on a charge of treason." Joe had his hands bound behind him, and his head was down, but he tried raising it now. Jim could see that it was a real effort. They must have worked him over pretty good, judging from the swelling on the side of his face. "Treason against whom?" he managed to say with an effort. "Harakat al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen," Haidar said. Jim remembered this from the briefing in Djibouti. Al-Shabaab, a terror group affiliated with Al-Qaeda, had control of much of southern and western Somalia. Jim didn't have much hope that a trial over here would be anything close to a trial back home. Their only chance was to drag this out long enough for some sort of rescue mission to reach them. He said, "Look, hey, Major Haidar, we don't know what's going on here, but maybe..." "Don't waste your breath, James," Joe said. "Haidar is..." The man behind Joe whacked him with the butt of his rifle. Joe groaned and slumped to his left, nearly falling off the chair. "My old friend Yusuf has become very cynical," Haidar said. "Apparently he has lost faith in our cause. There could be only one reason he was in Mogadishu talking to the American CIA. It is most unfortunate that I saw the boy Ayan coming into your quarters that one evening, Yusuf. At first I thought it was because, well, perhaps you are a Khabtith." Whatever that word meant, it caused some commotion to the men behind the prisoners. Haidar held up his hand for quiet. They go on, and finally, Jim says it's time to take some action. And he, after his being told the trial will be this evening, the major said, after evening prayers, Jim said, "Why bother?" Haidar looked at him, and Jim could sense Denise was as well, but he didn't want to break eye contact with the terrorist. He said, "What did you say, Mr. Hayes?" "You heard me. Why bother with a trial? Everybody here knows we're already convicted. Stop screwing around, Haidar, and let's get down to business." Haydar's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, Mr. Hayes? What possible business could you hope to transact with me?" I'm offering you a proposition. There's a commotion in the back, and finally Haydar says, "What is your proposition, Mr. Hayes?" "First, let's stop pretending that Amir there is in charge. You're running the show here and everybody knows it." "All right," Haydar said, sounding more serious now. Good. He'd been directly challenged and he didn't like it. Part of his little charade had fallen apart. "You are in no position to demand anything." "I'm not making any demands," Jim said. "I'm offering you a challenge, you and your people here." They didn't expect that. "And the challenge is what?" He says, "From what I have heard about your movement and your culture, you men consider yourself to be great warriors. Isn't that so?" "That is true," Khorsandi said, speaking in English for the first time. "We're kicking your ass in Iraq and Afghanistan because we have bigger guns than you do," Jim said. "And we've got planes and missiles and all the hardware money can buy. But one-on-one, man-to-man, you think you're better than any American. Isn't that right?" That caused another commotion behind them. Haydar holds up a hand, says, "Tell us what you have in mind, American." Jim stood up slowly. "I can beat any man in this camp, hand to hand. I don't need a fighter or jet or a tank or even a rifle. I'm not a soldier or a Marine, but I can still beat you. Man for man, you're no match for us, and you know it. Here's my challenge. I will fight any man in this camp, in fact, any 4 men. If I win, you allow us to go free. If I lose, do with us as you wish."
Excellent.
Very nice.
And I had hope for Joe coming in to rescue them until
Yeah.
Joe entered the room.
Me too.
Yeah, Joe's in a lot of trouble.
There you go.
Yes, he is.
Well, hopefully he'll hang on because we have to do
Our first commercial.
our first set of commercials. So hang on, don't go away, folks.
Word from our sponsor.
Come back with contact information and a book giveaway.
Yes.
Welcome to Magnolia Bluff, Texas, a small town in the heart of the Texas Hill Country near Burnett Reservoir. A town where everyone's business is discussed at the local coffee shop. A town where neighbors look out for each other. A town not insulated from murder and mayhem. Which begs these questions. Who is responsible for breaking into quaint Victorian homes? And how are poodles, ghosts, drug cartels, and a Ponzi scheme connected with a serial killer? Caroline McCluskey, the town's librarian, catalogs books using the Dewey Decimal System. When a black and white poodle puppy arrives unannounced, she calls him Dewey. Now, Caroline must catalog events to identify a serial killer in her town. Pick up your copy of the Dewey Decimal Dilemma, now available on Amazon.
They thought the siren was dead. In the novel Siren Song by author George Dismukes, James Harmon shot her twice. Several people saw her dead body sinking slowly into the abyss. But now, in Siren Song 2, evidence suggests that she may still be alive.
She killed that boatload of people. It was her! And she's just getting started!
Angie, that's impossible.
The cold chill up my spine tells me it's not impossible. We've got to start all over again. And this time, do it right.
Siren Song 2. The story continues. Available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites. Get your copy today.
And we're back.
We're back. That was great. That's really good. So,
All right.
people, you need to buy the book to find out what happens to Jim and to Joe and
So
to
you
the
want,
CIA agent.
want to give us a little little vignette on Quest for Vengeance?
Yes, this is book 2 in that Quest series. It follows the brothers, Jim and Mark, and now it takes place a year later after the events of Quest for Honor, and they are newly married with their new brides, and they're on a honeymoon tour of Italy, which is the home country of Jim's new wife, and we meet her in the first book, by the way. And when they're on their honeymoon tour of Italy, someone from Mark's army past becomes aware that they're very close to him. This is a guy in Serbia who ran into Mark during the Balkan Wars in 1999. And he believes Mark and his unit of U.S. Army soldiers caused the death of his brother. And so he's decided now he's going to take his vengeance upon Jim by kidnapping Jim's new wife, taking her to his home on the Danube in Serbia and saying, come and get her.
Great. She married into the wrong family.
Sounds like it.
Well, she never has her doubts, but it's touch and go there for a while.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very good book. And it sounds like it's a really good book. Now, you're working now on volume 3, correct?
Yes, it's going to be called Quest for Redemption, and it's going to take place about 3 or 4 years after the events of Quest for Vengeance. And it's going to focus primarily on Jim and his wife, Gina. I'm going to put Jim through the paces in terms of his marriage. He's going to run into some serious issues with regard to that. And as we all know, those of us who are married knows that it's a two-way street. A successful marriage is not successful just because of one person. It takes two. Similarly, a marriage can go down the tubes from one person, but primarily it's usually going to be both people participating in that too. Well, Jim's going to face a crisis in his marriage brought on primarily by himself. Decided to throw some real roadblocks at him. And the only way he can think of to try and patch things up is to take a trip together. And they're going to go to Peru, and they're going to hike the Salcantay Trail in the Andes. That's something Sue and I, my wife and I, did a few years back. You fly to Lima, the capital, and then to Cusco in the southern part of the city, the heart of the Inca Empire. Mm-hmm. And you hike about 50 miles over 5 days at about anywhere from 12,000 up to 15,000 feet of altitude. And you wind up in Machu Picchu, the ancient lost city. Yeah, it was quite a trip that we had. And I thought, this would be a good place to set a book. And especially one night toward the end of the trip, one of our guides, a Peruvian young man, told us that just a few years ago, he had been escorting an American couple on their honeymoon, and they were in camp one night, and in walked two guys carrying automatic rifles. And we're not Peruvian police or military. And he said things got pretty tense, especially when several other guys appeared up on the perimeter in the hills above them. And as he told us what had happened, unfortunately, it all worked out, but I thought, I got to use that. Something like that is going to take place that Jim and Gina, his wife, and they're on their second honeymoon, if you will, to try and revive their marriage. It's not going to go as easy as they might hope.
Well, sounds really wonderful. And I'm jealous that you got to see Machu Picchu.
No kidding, right?
It is an amazing place. We got up there one morning. They try and get you there in the morning to see the sunrise over the mountains in the east. And it was quite a thing. Sue has a travel blog. You can find a link to that in the on my website, and you'll have a lot of pictures there from that trip and others that we've taken.
Awesome. Okay,
why
don't we bring that up right now, all of your information.
Okay.
And I want to say again, this is a pre-record, so if you're wanting to ask David questions and make comments, it's a pre-record.
Mm-hmm.
We will try and monitor it and do what we can, but we're going to tell you where you can reach him, that you can ask him those questions and make those comments.
Mm-hmm.
All right, his website is davidtindellauthor.com. That's DAVIDTINDELL. And you all know how to spell author. Mm-hmm. His Facebook, I hope. His Facebook is David Tindell Author, making it easy for me, folks. And Twitter is at David Tindell 1. So remember that one.
And they can contact me direct through the website, through the contact form.
Okay.
Excellent. Now, his email is djtindellauthor@gmail.com.
Okay. While we've got that up, why don't we go ahead and do the book giveaways?
Good idea.
Get your typing fingers ready.
Yeah.
Book giveaway, the first 3 people to email djtindellauthor@gmail.com will win an ebook copy of choice. We've got 2 more books to talk about here in just a minute.
But you can find all of his books on his website.
And
yes, indeed.
A reminder, if you're listening to this after the live presentation or watching it on YouTube after the hours or days or weeks afterwards, go ahead and send him an email and say, hey, am I too late for the book giveaway? Sometimes there's extra books. You never know.
I might feel real generous. The holidays are
Hey.
coming, you know.
There you go. It
Yes,
is a holiday,
exactly.
so
Mhm.
it could be your lucky day, right?
Yes, I am wearing my Santa shirt.
There you go. I'm not wearing anything except my Bigfoot hat. So,
I hope you're
well,
wearing
I'm wearing
something.
other things, but I mean,
Goodness.
you know. Okay,
Not
onward.
that kind of show.
There you go.
Okay. Here's another book. This is a standalone book, and it's called The Heights of Valor.
Yes.
I
Theodore
see
Roosevelt is
the
my
front.
favorite president.
Teddy
And,
Roosevelt.
Yeah, I decided to write about him. Well, what can you write about TR that hasn't been written?
Yeah.
And so I decided to focus on the Spanish-American War period, the Rough Rider period.
He was here in
and-
Tampa during that period.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, he was. The Rough Riders came through here.
Yes, they did. And in fact, the story involves that. It's a parallel story. It's about written in the first person, unlike the other work that I have. The first person that you meet is a young man from southern Wisconsin who's going to quit the University of Wisconsin and join the Rough Riders. And he needs his father's blessing and his political connections to help get a berth in the regiment. And he agrees to keep a diary of his experiences and pass that along to future generations in the family so they'll know what it all means to make this kind of sacrifice. And so he does. And over 100 years later, the diary comes into the possession of his great-great-grandson, Jake Dawson, who also is a young man from Wisconsin, who also is contemplating quitting school and joining the Army, in this case to become a Green Beret, like his grandfather, Dennis, who was killed in Vietnam. And so it's a parallel story. And we read about the original, the Rough Rider and his experiences going to San Antonio for the training camp, then the train ride to Tampa, and then the boat, the ship to Cuba and the fighting in Cuba. And really, I tried to follow the historical record of the Rough Riders as closely as possible. It's amazing any of them made it home at all with what they had to face in Cuba. Then it follows the modern day young man as he uses his ancestors' writings to help him through the tough parts of his own training and then his deployments over in Iraq, in northern Iraq, to fight ISIS alongside the Kurds in that part of the country. So I had a lot of fun with that one. And TR is prominently featured in the Rough Rider portion of it.
Yeah, he's a big deal here in Tampa because, you know, it was an important part of our history. Tampa's a very Cuban city.
Yes.
You know, well known for their Cuban cigars, which are made here in America, folks. You don't have to worry. We're not into that kind of business. Well, if I imagine some people are in Tampa, but yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, the next standalone book
Is your
and
most
it's
recent.
your most recent.
Let's-
Yeah, let's take that email off. Hold on a second.
There we go.
Okay, The Man in the Arena.
Yes. Well, this happened as a result of a question my father asked me one time. In the summer before my freshman year of high school, we took a family trip out to Colorado. And as part of that, we toured the Air Force Academy. Now, in those days, you could just go in there and wander around, and which we did. It was the summertime, so the cadets were not on post, but it was a beautiful place. And I remember my dad asking me afterwards, would you ever consider going there? And of course, I was at that stage where my father was, you know, not real smart, and what did he know, and so on and so forth. And besides that, I'd already pretty much set my mind on going into radio, which meant going to the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, which happened to be only 15 miles from our home, which at the time had a world-class radio TV broadcasting curriculum. And so I never did go to the Air Force Academy, and you never did go into the Air Force. But you wonder, what if I had? And so I decided to write about that. And the story is about Scott Armstrong, who grows up in a small town on the river in southwest Wisconsin, like I did, only his is in the county north of my county, Grant County. He's in Crawford County. But I use real places. The names of the people involved have all been changed to protect the innocent, but the place names are real. And I was familiar with it from my youth, but I also made a road trip or two down there in recent months while I was writing the book to scout the terrain and make sure I had the feel of the whole place right. So Scott is a guy who is a high school football hero, but he promises his grandfather that he will go to the Air Force Academy. His granddad was a bomber crew member in World War II. And so he does, and he gets involved not as a pilot in the Air Force, but in working in intelligence and then in special tactics. And he has a long career, and he's not really thinking about retirement, but he has to start thinking about it fast, because when he comes home early from a field exercise one night, he finds his wife involved with another man, shall we say. Well, the way Scott handles this is, let's say it's a way that most men in that situation would really want to handle it, but really shouldn't handle it that way. And that leads to further problems for him on his job, and in fact impacts his decision-making, so that on his next deployment, which is not too long afterward, he makes a critical decision that goes against orders. And as a result, they tell him, it's time for you to retire. He has nowhere to go. He has not prepared for this. His marriage is done. He has no children. His own parents have passed away. His two sisters have moved out west. The only thing he can think of to do is go home. And so he does, back to the small town on the Mississippi River in southwest Wisconsin. And he's trying to get involved in his life, or turn it around and find out what he wants to do, deal with the trauma of the end of his marriage and the disappointment and shock at the end of his career. He meets a woman, a divorced lady who has a teenage daughter, and they start a relationship. And at the very beginning, it looks like it's going to go all right. And then Scott becomes aware that there are things going on in the county underneath the placid surface that are really not good. There's a gang there that's been pushing drugs, and now they're going into trafficking. And their first target is his lady friend's daughter. And so Scott once more has to step up and become the man in the arena that his grandfather always wanted him to be.
Interesting.
Wow,
that sounds really good.
Sounds really
Actually,
good.
all your books sound really
Thank you.
interesting.
Very engaging. We need to
Now, the cover of that one
Yeah.
shows the Mississippi River in a shot from a bluff on the Wisconsin side, just below Scott's hometown. It's a little town called Ferryville. And if you've never been to the drive Highway 35 up and down the coast of Wisconsin, as we call it, from Iowa basically all the way up past La Crosse and almost to Minnesota, it's one of the most beautiful drives you can do, especially if you don't do it in the wintertime. It really is a place that has its unique charms.
Yeah,
for sure. We need to take our second break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit
Another
more.
word from our sponsors. Don't go away, folks.
Don't go
We'll
away.
be right back.
So, you wrote a book. What now? It's time to make the choice between self-publishing and finding a publisher. Texas Sisters Press is a family-owned publishing company. We are also authors and avid readers. We can guide you through the entire process and will make sure your work is treated with the utmost respect. Where to start? Visit TexasSistersPress.com and click on the Submissions tab. Make sure you read the entire page. You'll find out what we can do and what we won't do. If you think we're a good fit for you, it's time to contact us. Texas Sisters Press. Quality books for the family.
Madison Jackson loved being a cop. A young girl is raped and murdered near Burnett Reservoir. Madison vows to get justice for the child. Madison travels to the heart of Mexican cartel country. She is kidnapped, tortured. Will Madison ever make it home? Justice by Kelly Marshall, only at Amazon.com.
Many secrets are hidden within the darkness of the jungle. Behold, this one about a man, a woman, a black jaguar, and an ancient Maya legend. Two Faces of the Jaguar is a novel by George Dismukes that will take you deep into the jungle and capture your imagination until the last word. Two Faces of the Jaguar is book one of a trilogy. Two Faces of the Jaguar, where only the adventurous dare to read.
Two Faces of the Jaguar, The Lost City, and The Jaguar's Quest are available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites. Two Faces of the Jaguar, the book people are talking about. Get your copy today.
And we're back again.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Well,
Okay.
thanks for giving us a great synopsis of all of your books. And again, we're having the third in your Quest series, and it's called Quest for
Redemption.
Mhm.
And do you know when that'll be out?
Well, I'm in the early stages of it now, and my target is to have it out probably by around Labor Day of next year. That's when The Man in the Arena came out, and we had a really good response to that. It seemed to be good timing. And so that's what my target is. I have to set myself a deadline because you know how that goes. If you just make it somewhere out there, well, you can always push somewhere out there, further somewhere out there. So I've set that as a deadline. I think we should be in pretty good shape.
Good. Yeah. So people should be looking forward to that.
Yeah. Now you kind of touched on it earlier about having some being involved in the martial arts. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, yes. You know, you watch the movies and you watch TV and you see martial artists, and whether they're famous guys like Bruce Lee or Jean-Claude Van Damme, you think, you know, boy, that'd be so cool to do. Well, I'm like most adults. I tried it and it didn't work out because you get into martial arts training and you discover real quickly that you're not going to be Bruce Lee in 6 weeks.
Probably
So
not.
that didn't work out a couple of times. And then our son, Jim, we got him involved in Taekwondo training when he was 7. And he really took to it, and it really did well for him. I'd had a bullying problem on the receiving end of bullying when I was a kid, and I didn't want to have Jim go through that. And sure, it helped him a great deal in that respect. So I finally decided after Jim was about 12 or 13, I said, well, I'm going to do it. And by then I was in my early 40s. And I remember Sue telling me, are you sure about this? Because it's one thing you discover that it's not easy. But I did, and it took me about 4.5 years to get my black belt in Taekwondo. And then I was a teacher for a few years. And then a gentleman who runs a karate dojo nearby, a friend of mine, started a weapons curriculum. And by weapons, I mean the Okinawan weapons like the nunchaku, not nunchucks. We're not supposed to call them that. Nunchaku, the bow, which is the long staff, and so forth. And he said, would you be interested? I said, yes. I'd done a little bit of that work. And Sue said, my wife, who had no previous experience, she said, yeah, I'd like to try that too. So we started training in that together. And another 4.5 years went by of training, 2 or a couple of 3 nights a week, until we were finally ready to test for our black belt, which we did, and we were successful. So I hold Shodan rank, as we call it, in 2 separate disciplines. Right now, I'm still training at our dojo in nearby Barron with my friend Tony Brown, and we're studying the Filipino stick art of arnis, as well as other weapons work and empty hand karate, as we call it.
Our 2 youngest studied karate, and their sensei was an indigenous person from Southern California. And we were living in Southern California at the time. And the head of his branch of karate was a very famous sensei from Japan. And he did movies like Black Rain and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, their sensei looked Japanese. But of course, he was not Japanese. I forget what tribe he was affiliated with, but he was very tall and he had long hair. And when his sensei came to visit and meet him for the first time to see who was the head of his dojo here, right? His sensei assumed that he was Japanese. And so talked to him the whole time in Japanese, and he had no idea what he was saying. So he just kept saying, "Hi, hi."
Hi. Yes.
That's all he said. And he would tell that story all the time. And he'd always say to the kids, "What's the first thing you do?" And he taught them all, you run, you try to get away before you have to have a conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. We teach the first rule of self-defense is don't be there.
Yep.
Don't put yourself in a situation where there might be hazard or danger or things like that. Right. Unfortunately, sometimes that can't be avoided. And so then you have to be prepared to defend yourself or defend the innocent people who might be nearby and need your help. And so that's when we have to take it to the next level. As a martial artist, occasionally people who don't train will ask you, have you ever had to use it? Have you ever really had to do it? And the answer in almost all cases is going to be no. And that's true, because one of the things we learn is conflict avoidance, using what we call verbal judo to de-escalate a situation before it gets out of hand. There have been one or two occasions where it looked like things might start happening, that I might have to take it to the next level. And it's amazing then how your training just kicks in. And so you know that, well, if he swings at me with his right, I'll block it here, then I'll destroy his knee and I'll bring him down, and that'll pretty much end the issue. And fortunately, it never got to that point. But you find yourself looking at things a little bit differently when you're always practicing situational awareness. You go into a store or a building, where are the exits? Does anybody there look out of place? And things of that nature. I remember I was in a convenience store one time when I was teaching Taekwondo, and the adult parent of one of my kid students came up and said, "Hey," he said, "I've always been meaning to ask you." "Yeah," I said, "You ever go in a store like this and think that you could take out everybody here?" And I said, "Well, no, I've never really given it any thought." "Why would you want to?"
Would rather not, right?
It might be true. Probably not, but it could happen. But you don't go into it seeing, I see that person as a threat, I'm going to take him out or anything. Now, if a person is acting suspiciously, if a person is acting in a violent manner or threatening manner toward yourself or to somebody else with you, that's a different story. I'm fortunate in that Sue also has a black belt, so when we travel, I don't have to worry about her. Some guy, does the wrong thing with her, he's done. That's all there is to it. And so it works out nicely. In fact, we watch movies a little differently than most couples. An action movie, we prefer those things. If there's a fight scene in there, hand-to-hand fighting, and frequently we have recorded the movie, after the show is done, we'll go back over that fight scene and break it down frame by frame, you might say. He did this right, he did that right. Oh, no, that's not right. That type of thing. It's a little bit odd. And we like to watch MMA fighting. One time we were watching a fight, and the guy won it by submitting his opponent with a rear naked choke. And I said to Sue, "Do you know how to do that?" No, nobody ever taught me. I said, "Well, come on, I'll show you how to do it." And you have to do it very carefully, of course. And I said, I applied it to her and applied just a hair of pressure, enough to let her know that this is how it works. I said, "No, you try it to me." And so she got her arms right. Now, a rear naked choke is very effective, and you can knock somebody out like that if it's applied that way. And so I said, "Okay, now squeeze." And pretty soon, without any time at all, I said, "Okay." And I tapped out real fast. And so she let up. And she told me a few days later that this was over the Labor Day weekend a couple of years ago, and one of her colleagues in the business and travel business asked her, "What did you and Dave do over the Labor Day weekend?" "Well, we watched the fights, and Dave taught me the rear naked choke, and I almost choked him out." It's not your typical what a couple does on a holiday weekend type of thing.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, I know you have time constraints, and we want to thank you for joining us today. Fascinating stories, don't you think?
Books sound great.
Yeah, everybody should, hop into your website there and take a look, especially at your pictures from your travel. I think.
We have quite a few on there. We've been blessed, as we said, to travel pretty much all over. We were in China, very fascinating place a few years back, and we went to Tibet rather than do the usual stuff where you go to Beijing and go to the Great Wall and things like that. We went way out there. We've cruised the rivers of Europe, which is a great way to go. We've been through, and when we travel, we try and imagine that, to try to do some adventure type of travel. So we are, as we said, next weekend or coming up, we're going to be traveling to Phoenix, Arizona to compete in a Spartan race. First time we've ever done that. So we're going to see how it goes. We've both been training hard for it for the last few months, and it's 5K with 20 obstacles.
Awesome.
So we'll see how it's going to go. But I decided that it's time for us to try something like that. As to what next year holds, we have no idea beyond that trip to Alaska with our family in the summer. So we'll probably think of something.
That's about 5K farther than I've trained for.
Right. All of our kids have done warrior races and
Tough Mudder,
Spartan Tough Mudder, and all of those. Yeah.
Okay.
And they've enjoyed them.
It's like one of those things. Well, you hear about it all the time, and you see clips about it on the internet, and you say, could I do something like that? Mm-hmm. And you say, well, why not? And you have to train for it, and you just can't waltz in and expect to handle that type of thing. Yeah. But I thought, well, we're going to do it. And I tell Sue this, that we have got to schedule that Kilimanjaro climb. We were going to do it last year, and then with COVID and everything in the aftermath, I kind of put that off. We talked about it for this year, but a few other things came up, and I said, that's on the bucket list. That's number one on the bucket list. So it has to be done. So I think we're going to do that next year.
Excellent.
Well, I want to wish you safe travels, especially next week, and good luck in your
Thank
race.
You.
Yeah.
And thanks once again for joining us. Going to move you over to the side here, and hang in there. We'll be back with you. And do you have anything you want to talk about?
No, we're good.
I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays if you don't celebrate Christmas.
Tune in next week, the 28th, for Chris Chrisman, author of the Mixed Magic Saga. And he'll be on board with us. And until next time.
That's all, folks.
Live every Wednesday, your Voice of Indie hosts Beam Weeks and Stephen Gees welcome authors, musicians, publishing industry pros, artists, and assorted creative guests for an exciting interactive hour. Call in during the show or post questions and comments on Twitter for responses in real time. Meet your favorite indie creators, learn inside tips, network, and promote your work. The link for each week's show is pinned on Twitter atop @VoiceOfIndie. And you can receive the link every Wednesday morning in your inbox by subscribing to our newsletter at freshinkgroup.com. Check out Voice of Indie every Wednesday on Blog Talk Radio and catch hundreds of episodes archived everywhere from our websites to our YouTube channel and Spotify.
Thank you for joining us here on Meet the Author. Make sure you stay up to date with our show by clicking like, follow, and share. And you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and more. See you next time on WLFE-DB.com.
You've been listening to WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.